One. Welcome into the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio on a Thursday. I am Tim Dennis. Boy, do we have a good show today, folks. Here's the deal. We're going to bring back an old friend of ours, and this is his new book. It is right here. It is called Dark Spirits, Monsters, Demons, and Devils. And boy, is it a good book. And I'm looking forward to having our guest on today. Richard Estep is the author of 20 books, at least according to this publisher. He's got other publishers, of course, and we'll get the official total when we bring him in here. Most of them in the field of the paranormal nonfiction, although there's true crime books, folks. I think this is kind of like the Yogi, no, not Yogi Berra. Who is it that has all the different, I don't, you know what? I'm gonna compare him to Ric Flair. Let's go wrestling here. He said he had 16 titles in WWE, but if you count the NWA titles, it's something like 30 some world championships. So you can't count the paranormal as 20 books because he's got a lot of other books there. I'm rambling. Let's continue with the intro here. He's got 20 in paranormal nonfiction, including serial killers, the minds, methods, and mayhem of history's most notorious murderers and the serial killer next door, double lives of notorious murderers. Additionally, he's written numerous paranormal nonfiction titles, including the horrors of Fox Hollow Farm, unraveling the history and hauntings of a serial killer's home. By the way, we might talk a little Fox Hollow Farm today as well, just a little bit, because we've got a lot to get to with this book. He's a regular columnist for Haunted magazine. He has also written the Journal of Emergency Medical Services. Richard appears regularly on TV shows like Haunted Case Files, Haunted Hospitals, Paranormal 911. He and I appeared on Paranormal Night Shift together as well. British by birth. You wouldn't be able to tell it by the accent. Sorry, Richard, I busted you there. Richard now makes his home a few miles north of Denver, Colorado, beautiful country, where he serves as a paramedic. Thank you, sir, for your service, and lives with his wife and a menagerie of adopted animals. And thank you for that as well. Ladies and gentlemen, here he is again, our good friend, Richard Estep. Richard, thank you so much for being on the program.
Hey, Tim, it's a pleasure. First time I've ever been compared to Ric Flair, and I suspect the last. And that is okay. It was cool. You know, I had a shock. I've said for the longest time, my current book count is 34. But then my webmaster actually, hey, Kira, by the way, thanks for doing that, put together, updated my page.
Yep.
Because I had let it go to seed over the last year or so. And the actual count now is 44 books.
Whoa!
44.
Oh, you've been busy, my friend. Holy
man, yeah, that's about a decade's worth of work, maybe 11 years worth of work. So
yeah, it is.
Yeah.
You know, I think it can be safely argued that, and God rest her soul, since Rosemary Ellen Guiley has passed on, I think you become the most prolific paranormal author in the field.
You know, I think Troy Taylor and Nick Redfern both have a claim on that as well. And Brad Steiger did too, you know, but certainly all those individuals have been people I've looked up to. I've really enjoyed their work. They are what I like to call working authors, working writers, you know, and of course, unfortunately, Rosemary is no longer with us, and neither is Brad. But I had their books and still have their books on my shelf, have done for years. I just love their work ethic, you know, and I've tried to emulate their style and their craft. And a big shout out, like I said, also to Troy Taylor and Nick Redfern, who are still with us, and they're also putting out many stories. I like prolific writers. It means they love their job usually.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Speaking of, boy, you've got a lot in this book and a lot of great stuff in this book. So tell me the inspiration behind Dark Spirits and why the compilation of the cases and the different examples in this book. What brought all this together?
When I was a kid, I used to get these great books. Like, I don't know if you got them in the US, but they were kind of like compendiums or treasuries, the kind of books where you would get enough information on a supernatural subject to kind of whet your appetite and encourage you to go read something bigger. So the Usborne book of UFOs or ghosts or monsters was one. Also treasury books like the Hamlin Book of Horror by Dan Farson, you know, those kind of books. The kind of book where as a kid on Christmas morning, you got this gift, you opened it, and you would read like 3-4 pages about a specific case or a monster or a phenomena, and then you would want to go to the library and learn more. And so Visible Ink said, hey, we'd like you to write about the darker side of the paranormal. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely, because I think that although I've got some pretty scary book covers out there, and the truth is, we want people to read our books and scary sells. But I've often soapboxed about how the vast majority of hauntings are not negative, they're not unpleasant. You know, we make them that way, and I think the same argument can be made for certain ET encounters, or call them what you will, UFO, UAP experiences, and cryptid sightings. You know, not all of them are frightening, but then some of them are. And so, you know, it's kind of irresistible to be given the opportunity to write about some of those darker instances.
You started out right away by taking us to some of the dark corners of the world, and one of the ones, you know, I want to bring up this fact right away. You know, there's such a thing when we talk about those dark corners of the world. One of the things we want to do right away is we want to make them darker than they already are. Mm. One of those dark corners is a place you and I have both been, and that's Waverlyhillssanitorium. And there's a common myth out there that there have been more deaths than advertised. More, I'll put it this way: death and destruction is always a big thing when it comes to a lot of these places, right?
Yeah.
And it's already a dark place. It's already got a heaviness to it. It's already got that feeling that when you go in there, that, you know, that it's got this sadness, this somberness to it. And when you walk through it, at least the old place, I haven't been to it since it's been renovated. I hear
I have.
Have you?
Yeah.
What's the difference between old and new, first of all?
They're doing a great job preserving it, and I really appreciate that they are, but it feels the same, at least to me. It feels a little bit less like nature is encroaching on the building as much as it once was.
Okay.
But it definitely feels like Waverly Hills always did to me.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, yeah, you make a great point. So, you know, this is not really controversial. It's inarguable. I think a lot of this stems back to a certain ghost hunting show. I won't specifically name the one, but the show kind of put out there, and this number is still on the website for the TV channel that airs the show to this day. They put out the idea that somewhere between 60 and 80,000 people died at Waverly Hills, which is ludicrous. Those numbers are out there. They're not hard to find. There's an excellent book on just the history of Waverly Hills Sanatorium that I recommend picking up if you like that side of things. And it's closer to 6,000, you know, 6 to 8,000. And you do a massive disservice when you overinflate things like that. You don't need to, you know, multiply the number of deaths by a whole order of magnitude to make it more tragic. What's tragic about Waverly Hills is not just that thousands of people lost their lives, and you definitely feel it, don't you, Tim, when you walk those hallways and you wander those patient rooms, but the fact that those who cared for them were on the front lines of a fight that they basically couldn't win, because the treatments for tuberculosis during the 1920s were just, minimal. Some of the techniques they tried were revolutionary. They did not work. Some of them actually hastened the demise of people, but they were done in good faith. And there are some people out there that kind of misrepresent this as being a form of torture. Again, all in the name of paranormal entertainment, which really, I can't stand that. It grinds my gears. So as someone that works as a paramedic and worked through COVID and has seen far too many of my colleagues hang it up after COVID because they just got tired of the abuse. And I don't want to soapbox too much, but they got tired of the abuse, from certain individuals that they started out clapping and banging, pans for healthcare workers, and afterwards saying, "Oh, it was all overblown, and you tried to take away our rights. You were doing it for the money," and things like that. Colleagues of mine died of COVID during COVID that were healthcare workers. So, I feel a real affinity for the men and women at Waverly Hills that were on the front line of this war against TB. And some of them fell victim and they got tuberculosis themselves and they became residents at Waverly Hills, and some of them died there. They literally laid down their lives in this war against tuberculosis. So we owe their memory the honor of accuracy. Actually, not even an honor. It's a basic basic courtesy and right that they should have, I think.
I don't know about you, but I'll jump on a soapbox for a minute.
Yeah.
I cringe when I see current day cases of tuberculosis that you hear about little sprouts that pop up around the nation and you know it's easily avoidable.
You know I have it, right? Did you know I have it?
No.
This is not a joke. I'm not setting you up for a joke. I know you know my sense of humor. I
Yeah.
have latent, don't worry, but I have tuberculosis, and
Well,
I contracted it during my work as a paramedic. Two of the most common places that you can catch tuberculosis right now are amongst the homeless population, the population of people that are experiencing homelessness, or inside jails, one of the two. And I go in and out of both of those kind of places and mix with folks in both pools as a paramedic. And I'd been to Waverly Hills and I ended up going back afterwards, but I had a test to get a new job as a clinical educator. And I was told, hey, Richard, you have TB.
really?
Yeah. So I live with it. And it can be cured, but the cure is not, side effect free. So after consultation with my doctor, it stays latent and I'm not treating it. And it's not infectious. Like I feel like I should lead with that. But I have it. And so it resonates very much with me, what these men and women went through. It is out there. You can get it. You can get this tomorrow. And you
Yeah.
trust me, you don't want it.
Right, right. It to me it I guess when I see it pop up and spread, I guess to me I'm and I'm unabashedly and unashamedly a guy who you know I grew up in the 70s. So the thing is you just went and got vaccinated. That was the thing. It was part of your schooling. You had to get
Sure.
vaccinated before you went to school. And
Yeah.
I don't understand and this is where I get off my soapbox, and you can email me and you can bash me all you want if you're not exactly
Yeah.
we'll call it what it is if you're an anti-vaxxer. Um, but the fact of the matter is the for the majority of us, and there's a huge majority, vaccines don't hurt you.
Right.
They just don't. So and they've saved a lot of people. There's a reason polio went away.
Yeah, there is. And
Yeah,
you look at how miserable polio was, people in eye and lungs and things like that. It was an absolutely miserable experience.
right,
Really bad.
right. So it to me there's and again, and my apologies to you. I had no idea.
It's
There's
okay.
a reason why tuberculosis is not as widespread as it was. There's a reason why we don't have to have sanatoriums anymore. There's a reason why, those buildings are no longer effective or out there. And essentially, there's a man I worked with at Minnesota Public Radio who,
Mm-hmm.
during World War II or shortly after, um, he put together shows in your area, in the Denver area, jazz,
Yeah.
for the USO, and
Right.
and for soldiers that had tuberculosis, and
Mm.
up there in the mountains, they would take them up into the
Clear air, right.
in the clear air,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and he
Sorry.
would put those. Oh, I'm sorry, and he would put those shows together, those jazz shows for those vets who had TB.
Well, and that's why, talking about haunted places, the Stanley Hotel exists.
Hmm.
Because F.O. Stanley built his hotel there up in Estes Park, Colorado, and high up in the Rockies, simply because he was told when he contracted TB that was the only way to get any relief, the only way to send the disease into remission. So the Stanley exists because one man contracted tuberculosis. But yeah, it is still out there. It is still a thing. And so anyway, Waverly Hills has that dark history. But I'll tell you something else. I'm the kind of writer that I like nuance. I like shades of gray. So although there's darkness in this book, there's also light. And I look at the men and women of Waverly Hills, especially the care providers. And by the way, I don't just mean doctors and nurses, but the cooks, the cleaners, the janitors, everyone that contributed to keeping that place open, as heroes. They are American healthcare heroes. And they put it on the line for their fellow human beings. And I think that Waverly Hills, sure, it has this dark and scary reputation, which is deserved. Certainly, it is a haunted place, but also it is this beacon of basic decency of human beings putting it on the line to take care of their fellow human beings. And there is a lot to admire about that place, and we should remember that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Although there was one kind of disturbing story about the body shoot, which is kind of funny in the book. At least I find it, I have a grim sense of humor, but I'll leave it for the book. I'll have people go get the book so they can read it. Um, I chuckled, and maybe that's inappropriate, but that's just me.
I feel like you shouldn't be teasing the listeners, the viewers now, Tim. Go on. Give them that one. There's plenty of other stuff in there. Give them that
Oh, I'd
story.
rather you give it to him because I
Nope.
feel that your dry wit would be now. See,
This is on you, my friend. Go ahead.
I have to refer to the book in order to give you the full story because if I tell you off the top of my head, it's not as funny. I have to see. You're going to make me go to the book and get it in order to.
Yeah, I'm always happy to send people to the pages of my book, my friend.
Yes, yes, yes. But you know the body shoot or the body tunnel. When most people who are in it, let's just give them the haunted history. When
Yeah.
you're in it, a lot of times, like with you, and I've heard it too, you will either hear your own voice coming back at you, or you'll hear somebody else's voice. You'll say, "Well, wait a minute, did you just say something to me?" And somebody could be on the other end of the building
Yeah.
and hear their voice, right?
Right, and it's more than just the acoustics. I was on the roof at the opposite end of the building. It is a huge building, as you know, and my colleagues very clearly heard me talking from the tunnel, which should not be possible over that kind of distance. But they reckon apparently I have a distinctive accent. I don't hear it myself, but that's what they say. And maybe I did one of those Ric Flair woos. But either way, they were convinced what they heard. And as they turned the corner to the top of the body chute, it was completely empty. I'd say not a living soul in there, but there are the bats.
Yeah, yeah.
There are bats, and we were ambushed by the bats in there at least once.
Okay, so oh, and by the way, it was a nice touch by your lovely wife to play some Cole Porter while you were there at the Waverly as well.
Well, that was the place that taught me to be less of a gearhead. And I mean, no disrespect to any paranormal enthusiast that is all about equipment, because I was that way. But I got Waverly Hills for like 8 hours, I think it was, and it's not cheap to rent, nor should it be. It's iconic, right? And so we spent hours running cables. This was pre-Wi-Fi, my first visit, so we ran cables for mics and everything like that. And then I realized, oh, good Lord, 2 hours just wiring this place. I'm 25% of the way in and I haven't experienced anything. And then I hear these strains of Cole Porter, just drifting through those hallways, and you close your eyes. And that's when I had this epiphany. I'm like, we should not be trying to just record stuff here. We should connect.
Yeah.
And if you close your eyes and if you do these kind of slow waltzes and dances, you just close your eyes and Waverly Hills speaks to you. And I don't mean literally, perhaps, but something about it, Tim, you can just connect with that age and with those people long gone. I really think it's possible. And I say that as someone who is literally zero psychic sensitivity. In fact, if it's possible to be negative psychic, that's me. But even I felt this connection, and the music helped do that. And I've started doing that more at other haunted locations. I was at Sheboygan Asylum a couple of years ago and just had this hankering on the psychiatric wing to play Unchained Melody by the Righteous Brothers. And I was at a public event. And so you have all of the rooms, I don't like calling them cells there. So that, and I would have the public guests each go into one of the rooms. And we just sat and played that song and let those strains fill the hallway. Everybody was crying at the end. And you just felt somehow that you had made a connection with those walls and the people that once lived there.
So how can you say you're not connected psychically if all of a sudden this comes over you and you just Unchained Melody pops into your head and yet you've connected with everybody, maybe not only living, but maybe dead, and maybe you've connected everybody and they have this residual feeling all the way around, and somehow you've hit them all in the emotional strings.
Well, because you can achieve that with a good book or with a good movie. I watched the end of Gladiator and I'm in tears. I mean, it's all active, right? And so I'm connecting with this story and with emotion thanks to what the director and the actors and the producers have done. A good composer can do it. So I don't think that that's a psychic thing.
But I can argue that's empathic and that somewhat is psychic, isn't it?
Maybe. I mean, never say never, and I certainly couldn't say definitively. But
Okay,
yeah.
fair enough. Okay, so the story goes like this. Uh, you put in the book, unfortunately, the practice of using the tunnel, the death tunnel, the body chute, I think the Booth brothers called it the death tunnel.
Mhm.
The practice was halted abruptly after there was a terrible accident in the tunnel. Now, see, I'm laughing and I shouldn't be laughing, but I am. I'm sorry.
All
Oh,
right, try and keep your head, Tim.
I will. Okay. Professional, right? Journalism. I should use the journalistic voice here, right?
Mr. Cronkite.
That's right. A winch was used to lower bodies down a specially laid track. The cable snapped unexpectedly, sending a dead body hurtling down the track on a runaway cart. It had picked up so much speed by the time it reached the bottom of the tunnel that the cart blasted straight through the doors and flung the body out into the open air. See, I get a visual there.
I do too, and it's like a trebuchet or a catapult kind of effect, isn't it? And that is unfortunate. It is bleakly comic, in addition to being tragic.
I get a very Monty Python Bring Out Your Dead vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm, that's just me. Just saying. But, I know I got a gruesome sense of humor. What can I say?
I'm looking around because it's storming like you wouldn't believe. It really is the classic dark and stormy night here in Colorado. So the
Oh,
wind is howling around the eaves, and yeah, it's ghost story weather, Tim. So I'm glad we're recording now.
yeah, that's good. Are you getting snow or rain over there?
No, right now it's just very blustery, but it's overcast. It's let's put it like this. It's a nice summer's day in England if you look outside my window.
Oh, oh,
Yeah,
that's yeah. We have a winter storm warning out. I think we're supposed to get hit around 4 a.m. So we're due for it too. It's nice and gray outside too right now. So
it is very gray and gloomy, which
yeah.
makes me happy, makes me feel less homesick.
Well, that's good. That's good. Well, should we keep going with some
Yeah, let's
haunted?
crack on. This is great.
All right, all right. I want to talk a little bit about the Hotel Cecil and about Patty Negri's experience there because it was not a good time. Um,
No, no.
first?
Yeah, I mean, I'd written a book called In Search of Demons, where I went on the trail of demons, and couldn't find many. And I'd interviewed Patty to get her perspective, not just as a medium, but also as a practicing witch. And she agreed with me that the word demon or demonic is overused in the paranormal field. But she said, there are some places that I've been that I consider definitely demonic. And I asked for an example. And she said one was LA's infamous Hotel Cecil, which, a lot of us are familiar with that because of the unfortunate case of Elisa Lam, who was the Canadian tourist that was staying in LA and had checked into the Cecil and disappeared under mysterious circumstances. And her body was discovered quite some time later floating in one of the water tanks on the roof. And Patty had told me that she was filming an episode of Ghost Adventures there, and was overcome, in her words, by some kind of dark, malevolent force that was compelling her to hurl herself out of one of the upper windows, like upper floor windows. And it was only the fact, she said, that Zach Bagans yelled at her, "Patty, what are you doing?" That brought her back to her senses. Otherwise, she might have actually jumped, which is terrifying. And she said that, yeah, whatever haunts that hotel, whatever is active at that hotel, it's dark, it's malevolent, it's malicious. And, the Cecil has been the home to at least two serial killers. The most common one, and most well-known one is Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker.
Mm-hmm.
And there are stories of him living on one of the upper floors and just blasting metal music all hours of the night. And there are also rumors, I think they're unsubstantiated, but of him conducting some kind of occult rituals up on the roof of the Cecil. How much of that is hyperbole and how much actually happened, I don't know, but certainly those stories are out there. And the other is the lesser-known European murderer, Jack Unterweger. So all hotels have deaths, right? All of them. I say that as someone who's worked in one in the past. People naturally die in hotels. You have a lot of human beings moving in and out, someone's going to die statistically. But the Cecil's deaths seem to be a little more gruesome and macabre and outright tragic than most. So, for example, there was the poor young woman that threw her own newborn baby after giving birth in one of the restrooms on one of the upper floors. She threw her baby out of the window. And the coroner ruled that the poor infant was still alive at the time. It's awful. You know, there was the member of the U.S. Army that cut his own throat with a knife in one of the rooms. And there have been murders at the Cecil too. So, you know, Paddy was convinced that there is some kind of, for want of a better word, demonic force at work in that hotel.
Okay, so I'll ask this unusual question. If you've gone looking for demons and you found none, and if you're standing in the lobby of the Hotel Cecil, so to speak, and you say to yourself, I don't believe in it, I've never seen it, what do you determine that negative energy is? Is it a ley line? Is it just a negative energy center? What do you think drives all these people to do these acts?
Well, I'm not so arrogant to say there's no such thing as demons just because I couldn't find it. I mean, I couldn't find a winning lottery ticket either, but they're out there.
That's true.
I am reliably informed. I think it's very arrogant to just make blanket statements like, you know, not that you were, but to make a blanket statement like that. I couldn't find something, therefore it doesn't exist, you know? I mean, how many seasons have they been looking for stuff on Oak Island? How many seasons have they been trying to find Bigfoot? That's not to say it isn't real, you know, but it's yet to be found. So I try and remain open-mindedly skeptical, Tim, because skeptic's one of those terms that gets a bad rep. I'm just saying, what's the evidence? You know, what's the likelihood of this actually being real? But it's intellectually arrogant and lazy to just dismiss it. You know, for one thing, when it comes to demons, you are dismissing the beliefs of about half the entire human race. So you better know what you're talking about. And when it comes to matters of faith, there is always room for doubt, isn't there?
Yeah, very true. Very true. As far as the stuff on Oak Island, just ask Scott Walter. He'll tell you where it all is. So that's all. I mean, you know.
Well, don't spoil it because I never did get to the end of that show, but I will do someday.
Well, I mean, you have to ask him directly. He won't tell you on air or anything, but you know, but just ask him. He'll spoil it all for you.
Okay.
Just let's take our break right here. When we come back, we got plenty of dark stuff to talk about tonight on a dark and stormy night here on Darkness Radio. Richard Estep is the author of this wonderful book. I have it right here. Here it is. It is Dark Spirits. I got to cheat here because I don't ever remember the subtitle. Monsters, Demons, and Devils. There we go. So we encourage you to go get it right now. We have a link in the description of this program, so you can go get it. By the way, wonderful cover too. Look at that.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, Tim.
There's nothing much darker than the cover of this book right here. Yeah. You can't convince me you haven't seen demons because look at the front of this cover.
For sure. That was one of 3 covers. They did give me some input on the cover. I liked that one the best. The other 2 were really good, but that one is just, you don't want to meet this chap on a dark and stormy night.
No. That's evil right there. So, Dark Spirits, Monsters, Demons, and Devils. We have a link in the description of this program. When we come back, I do want to. We talked a little bit about the Stanley and Richard's experience at the Stanley is there. I want to talk to you a little bit about movie lore when we come back. A little bit about the Stanley. We'll breeze over that, and then I do want to talk a little vampire lore. I want to get into that.
That sucks.
It does suck a little bit. And then we'll get maybe even get into some aliens a little bit. And I want to go a little bit outside the norm of these shows because normally it's, you know, ghosties and stuff like that. But I want to get into some non-traditional stuff outside of what these shows normally get into and some of the non-traditional stuff you have in this wonderful book here. So Richard Estep is our guest. We'll talk more dark spirits when we come back right here on the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. Welcome back to the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Tim Dennis. My guest, Richard Estep. This wonderful book, Dark Spirits, is his brand new book that's out there. Monsters. Let me see if I can do it without looking at it. Are you ready, Richard? Monsters, Demons, and Devils.
Well done.
Wow, I did it. It's that ginkgo biloba I've been taking.
Up the dosage.
I'm going to have to, because I'm having a tough time remembering after the first time. But we have a link to it in the description of the program. So by all means, go get it. It's a wonderful book, and it's available right now by visibleinkpress. So you have spent time at the Stanley, not just looking around. You spent time working there, and I've spent a fair amount of time there as well, investigating. And we can both come to one conclusion, and that's this: not a lot dark there.
No, I would agree. I always used to make a joke when I was giving the ghost tours there that people come and they expect The Shining, and that's understandable.
Yeah.
So I would take people on the tour, and we would go past the Rose Garden, and I would tell people, people think the Stanley has this tragic history, and it's not. It's very friendly, it's very warm, it's very loving. It's a wonderful history. Dark things have happened here in our Rose Garden, and the whole tour would go quiet, and I'd say, yeah, this is where we do a lot of our weddings, and we just move on. And it's funny, there was a very male laugh quality to the cheap laugh I would get out of that. But the Stanley is on the map because of Stephen King. That's just undeniable. I think there should be a statue to Stephen King at the Stanley. Not that anyone's asking my opinion. He turned it into his Overlook Hotel. Now, if you read The Shining, King's novel, he has an actual front preface to the book that says, look, there are many historic haunted hotels in the Rocky Mountains. The Overlook Hotel is none of them, right? And then the first scene is Jack Torrance interviewing for the caretaker's job, and the manager gives him the history of the Stanley. Like the year it opens, the circumstance, he's giving you the Stanley Hotel history. So it's a barefaced lie by Stephen King, I think. Very tongue-in-cheek. And obviously, Mr. King is very affectionate towards the Stanley, and so am I. And again, I think the hotel owes him a great debt. But the story is that on, the night that he was staying there alone with his wife, and there were no other guests in the hotel, he wandered the halls, that they were preparing to close the hotel down for Halloween, not for Halloween, for the end of the year. The Stanley used to close down before winter kicked in. And rather than have this, winter caretaker and family, it would just be left until the spring. So for a good 3 or 4 months, the hotel was just left dormant. And so on the last night, he wandered around and heard a few ghost stories at the bar from a bartender called Lloyd, which also made its way in. And I think something about that place inspired him, so he said. That and a nightmare he had in the most active haunted room, 217, is what inspired him to write The Shining. So the Stanley deserves its reputation for being haunted, but it is not a dark haunting per se.
I actually got the pleasure of being able to stay in 217 one year when I was there. And
really?
Yeah, because of the shall I call it the myth? I don't know if it's a myth or not, but Mrs. Wilson being there, I think is what the name of that.
Miss Wilson, yeah.
It was supposed to be there and put your clothes away or whatever while you're not looking. I got a little bit, I guess, shy, and so I slept with Sports Center on all night, hoping that she wouldn't show up and put my stuff away. I don't know. I just thought it was a little creepy that she might show up in the middle of the night.
Were you alone at the time, Tim?
I was, yes.
So at least the way it was, the way the law goes, Miss Wilson being of that kind of Victorian value set, she really, really comes out to play when you have unmarried couples in 217.
Okay.
Or single men. So you would have been a candidate, because back in her day, the single men were not permitted to sleep under the same roof as unmarried ladies. So they were kept in the lodge, the building next door, which is like a mini version of the Stanley. That was really Estes Park's first boys' club, historically speaking. So yeah, for you to be in there on your own, as it would have been more likely you had a brush with Miss Wilson if you'd been with a companion.
Okay.
Of either gender, if you were not married, and if not, single man, she frowns upon that. So you slept undisturbed?
I did. I don't, well, I felt uneasy, but I slept undisturbed. And I don't know if that was my own psyche, just going, I wonder if she's around, type deal. I wasn't freaked out, but I did hear kids running up and down the hallway And I know that's not generally the floor, is it? That's not generally
No, the top floor of the hotel
right.
is the one that used to be the children's dorm.
Yeah.
And so one of the most common complaints that the staff get there is exactly that. Kids running up and down the hallways at all hours of the night. And then, our night manager would check the logs and there are no children staying either on that floor or in the entire hotel,
But
which is kind of cool.
I heard somebody running up and down, and I could have swore it was a kid. And then because it was just our group our entire group that had the entire main hotel. I knew there were no kids.
Yeah.
So it was just a bad night, a couple nights of sleep. So I think the second night I invited in another guy to sleep on the floor. Cause I'm like, you know what, maybe that'll help me sleep a little bit better. Cause I just thought maybe, if there's two people in here, I won't, you know, I'll sleep better. I didn't sleep better. So
Ghost shield. Call it what it is, Tim. Human shield.
human shield. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the fact that I was scared. I was unnerved. And that was early in my quote unquote ghost hunting career. Now I can fall asleep if the devil himself is sitting on my chest. I think we all get to that jaded part, you know.
I
Um,
think so too. And I think I don't know if there's a huge psychological component. So if you are told that you're in the most haunted room of the most haunted hotel in the Rocky Mountains, it's almost inevitable that your psyche is going to start playing tricks on you, that every creaking floorboard is something sinister. And it's one thing for us to talk about this now, in a brightly lit room, but when you're in a place like that all alone and it's late at night, the world looks a little different. The world looks a little darker, doesn't it? And
yeah,
it's easier to believe that you might have invisible company watching you.
right, right. And I think I was psyched out. I'll admit that. I was I was pretty psyched out at the time, and I think I'd been maybe investigating all of 2 years at the time. So it was pretty, and I hadn't been on too many investigations, so it was a little heavy. So yeah.
But you survived, and that's the main thing.
Yeah, yeah. I only woke up with a couple of stab wounds in my neck. So no, I'm kidding. Speaking of stab wounds in the neck,
Oh, nice segue.
yeah, look at that. Yeah, I do this for a living. Uh, I want to get to a little bit of vampire lore, but not your traditional vampire lore. I mean, we could do the typical Dracula talk or talk Elizabeth Bathory, but we've done that on other shows. Um, you have a Colorado vampire?
Yeah, he is in not that far from me, and he has what's known as the vampire grave, which I think is kind of a cool and sad story. And like so many vampire legends here in the US, it's based upon misunderstanding of people and the things that happened to them. So this chap was a miner that didn't speak a great deal of English.
Hmm.
And so rumors started. Yeah, he was an immigrant, and rumors started because of his appearance, which was a little bit vampire-esque. Well, if you think about miners, they seldom appear all that tanned if they're working underground for hours on end. So it's pretty easy to see how someone might kind of end up that way. And when I wrote about vampires in this book, yeah, I did put some stuff that you can't not talk about Elizabeth Bathory and historical vampires. Of course, there's that expectation. But what fascinated me more is the kind of why did people believe this kind of stuff, even till as recently as the end of the 19th century. And things like tuberculosis. Again, our old friend is coming back. The idea that you would have bodies that were buried and had coughed up blood, had brought up some blood, they had blood-stained lips when they were exhumed. We also have this misconception out there. People will still tell you that the fingernails grow after death and so does the hair.
Yeah.
That's not true. They do appear longer because the skin around them actually retracts. The scalp constricts. The gums can constrict and make the teeth elongate a little bit. And of course, those bodies will sometimes, there are gas pockets, dead bodies, as any mortuary professional will tell you. They will move, they will fart, they will belch. Contents of the stomach will sometimes come up. You'll sometimes get blood in the mouth and things of that nature. So I think it's very easy to see how people even as late as the late 19th century in rural areas. And I'm thinking now like the New England vampires, like the Mercy Brown case. People believed that these were the bloodthirsty dead rising from the grave. It made sense to them. Even though if you would get into the cities and you would see the latest medical science and there were explanations for so many of these things, things looked a whole lot different just a few miles outside of the cities in the countryside, where the rural life was in some ways a lot simpler, and in some ways a lot less enlightened.
It's funny how, I'm not going to use the word, well, I could use the word uneducated, but it's funny how we jump to conclusions. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah,
To things that we don't understand, right?
we do.
And we take that fear and we roll it into something, and then that something becomes a myth or a legend, and then we run with that legend and we make it bigger than what it is.
Yeah.
And before we know it, now that myth or legend is something that not only do we roll it into an entertainment thing, but we also run it into something that dominates our culture, right? Something that we've made it bigger than what it really should be.
Well, and I think we've reinvented it as well. I mean, if you look at the way vampires have been in popular culture, you get Lugosi, who's kind of the mysterious, Romany traveler-like kind of vampire. Then we saw the Hammer movies, the classical kind of Hammer horror movies and things like that. We had Frank Langella play Dracula. And then, in the 21st century, well, we can talk about George Romero and Martin, the vampire movie that often gets forgotten, which brought a contemporary spin to it. Everyone knows there are the vampires from Twilight, which have gotten mocked by some people, but have tens of millions of fans. The aristocratic kind of vampires, and then we made them kind of sexy. The idea that the vampires have always had that layer of sexiness to them, right? I think Bram Stoker's Dracula, the one starring Gary Oldman, brought forward this idea of vampirism as almost like an STD, a sexually transmitted disease, bloodborne. Brought kind of syphilis into the equation. And we keep reinventing them. And they look like anything from bat-winged monsters to the most handsome men and women Hollywood can throw at us, Sometimes they're funny. We've seen the funny vampire on movies and TV shows. Leslie Nielsen playing Dracula, springs to mind. Or What We Do in the Shadows is massively popular and deservedly so. And then, we've just had 6 seasons, 6 years of What We Do in the Shadows, laughing and lampooning at vampires. And then Nosferatu comes along and just drives a stake through the heart of it all. And it brings back the monstrous Victorian vampire full circle. What's coming next?
Yep. What I found interesting too was the way AMC not redid, but reimagined Interview with the Vampire, and how they expanded on what Anne Rice did.
Yeah. I think Anne Rice wrote terrific books, and they've taken them, I won't say to the next level, but they've put a fresh slant on an old classic. And that's one of those great properties now you can enjoy in different ways, both incarnations.
Yeah. It really, because there's no, I mean, you've got the immortality part to it, but they show you the deep relationships and I guess the handing it down through time, and they show there's no such thing as a time travel thing to it, but what's the word I'm looking for here, Richard? The generational aspect of it, going from the past to the present, and they show the social ramifications of things, and they tie vampires to modern day society, and how the euphemism of a vampire really does reflect society. How what they do and what they are really does reflect our society.
It holds a mirror back up to us, doesn't it? To who we are in those times, which vampires would have to do in order to kind of blend in. But then also you have that idea of, if you live that long, how does it not drive you quite mad?
Oh, right. And
You know?
You know, the clever way of I love the clever way of how in each incarnation of how they have to survive, eventually they do get caught. I mean, you don't live that long and not have to get out of a scenario, go underground and then have to come back, right?
Yeah, and you get complacent. I thought the movie version of Interview with the Vampire, my favorite scene in that is just a very brief scene, and it is the one where Brad Pitt's Louis is in the movie theater watching Christopher Reeve as Superman. So what are we at? 1978, I think it is.
Yes.
In real, and he says, you know, this is the first time I've seen a sunrise in over 100 years because it's on the screen. And he sees Superman, you know, that great shot where he's flying. I thought that was just an amazing perspective. Imagine if you couldn't ever see the sun until the recorded image became a thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
that.
Right. It's an amazing scene. It really is. Um, let's talk a couple of beasties from your area. Um, you've got a couple over there in Colorado, and I mean when we think Colorado, when I think Rocky Mountains, other than Rocky Mountain National Park, and the occasional red fox that runs by, and I'm not talking about the comedian. Um, you might think that in that area that Sasquatch would be a thing, right?
And is actually.
Okay. So, but you've got two in the book here, and the names, I don't want to say them wrong. Is it the Augarino and the Slide Rock Bolter?
Yeah, the slide rock bolter. The Ogurino is kind of like the worms from Tremors,
Okay.
which is pretty cool. I love the Tremors movies. Perfect mix of scares and fun. And the slide rock bolter is a little harder to believe. It's supposed to be this massive worm-like creature which hangs out on the very tops of mountains. And almost certainly this was one of those stories that came to us from, you know, woodsmen, from loggers, from men that told stories around campfires, and in order to scare each other. And once its unsuspecting prey was walking by lower down the mountain, this thing would just propel itself down the mountainside, open up this giant set of jaws and chomp them as it went past.
Oh,
So yeah, and it would come down in a rock slide. It would bolt down, so hence the slide rock bolter. It's unique to Colorado cryptid lore, and much as I'd love to believe it's real, where are the skeletons? Right, where are the skeletal remains? But what I love about the story is that I live in the Rockies, so I always am looking up at the mountains, and I always look for them just in case, you know, because sometimes there's a grain of truth in folklore, you know. So I know that it's a made up thing. It's just so cool, and if there's enough people believe in it, who knows?
so in reality, is there a species that's even close to that?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, it's so fantastical, like a giant worm. You know, I wrote about the lambton worm in this book,
Yeah.
which was kind of like a wingless dragon that relates to medieval England. Um, and this is a worm that grew. And when we say worm, we think of this tiny crawling thing, which is how it started. But then when you spell worm with a Y instead of an O, so like worm, it takes on this kind of dragon-like connotation. But of course, it had no wings. And this thing grew and grew and grew until the Lambton Knight ended up getting a suit of armor with blades embedded in it. So as soon as the worm wrapped itself around him and he was trying to cut this thing apart, um, the problem most people had when they tried to kill the lambton worm, it was said, was that they would chop it up and like a worm, it would just, you know, you've now got two worms. It would like grow into separate parts, and sometimes refuse or get bigger and badder. So his whole idea was if I embed blades all over my armor, pointy, sharp things, then the worm can coil itself around me and it won't be able to resist, you know, the onslaught of blades. So I thought that was a cool story. And there is a mound in the village of Lambton to this day. It said the worm lies beneath the mound, which I just love those kind of tales, you know,
Yeah.
the kind of mound that generations of kids have avoided after dark just in case.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a cool story.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, you and I have both been up at the Palmer House Hotel up in Sun
Mm.
Center.
Yeah.
What is it that you're under the understanding of that's in the basement?
I heard various stories about what's in the basement. I hadn't heard anything though too dark. Did I miss something?
Well, according to what some people may believe, and some investigators have told me, they think that there may be a darker elemental spirit in the basement.
Okay.
But I've even heard the word puckwudgie, and you do
Oh
have
yeah.
puckwudgie in the book. What is your understanding of what a puckwudgie is?
Hookwadgie are said to be, and they seem to be like not unique to, but primarily an East Coast thing, a New England thing, where they're essentially, yeah, elementals that are either mischievous or sometimes downright hazardous. And they tend to be tied to a location, an area, a geographic feature. So nature spirit, nature elemental is really the short way of looking at it. They're supposed to be very, very small, very fast, darting things that dart in and out, the kind of thing you would see zip past the corner of your field of vision. And when you turn to look, they're gone. And again, a lot of stories have puckwudgies being, mischievous, but there are some that say that these are not creatures that you necessarily want to cross.
Right, right. I don't know that a puckwudgie accurately describes what's in that basement because at the Palmer House Hotel, mainly because there are times where it can get extremely angry, but there's times where it's very calm. That it doesn't, it doesn't fire up like you would think a mischievous puckwudgie would.
Depends on the stimulus, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I don't know. But it definitely is elemental. It's not of an intelligent human, um,
Mm-hmm.
type haunting. But it's neither here nor there. On a side note, I'm gonna prod and poke you here and ask you, between you and I and the fence post and just all the people listening, are you by chance coming out in August to play for Potographs for Pooches?
Where's that going to be?
Palmer House Hotel.
I am not on the invitation list, so I'm assuming
Oh,
not.
so if I can have Tim throw you an invitation, are you going to come out to play?
Depends entirely which weekend.
It's
It's a
August
it's a
2nd.
it's a good cause. And I do love animal charities. Not that I don't love human charities, but animal charities are dear to my heart. So depends on how my August looks rather.
Okay.
But I had a good time there last time.
Yeah.
And having a good time in a good cause is one of my favorite things about the paranormal field.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
I'll talk to Tim and Lauren and see if they'll throw you an invite. So yeah, I know I had a fun time with you out there last time.
We
So
had a blast last time. It was a nice area. People were friendly, and I think that the town itself is my kind of town. I like its history. There's so much to learn, looking at some of the town's place in history. I had no idea until I went that it had such a colorful background. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And, unfortunately, it doesn't seem like we can conjure Sinclair Lewis. I don't know why, but
it's writers, man. I mean, it's absolutely, when you look at like the pedigree of a writer like that, very, very cool indeed. Was it Sinclair Lewis? Was it Upton Sinclair? Did I get it? I'm not sure which. Uh,
Sinclair Lewis. Yeah.
Sinclair Lewis. Yeah, clearly I need to brush the cobwebs out of my memory. But I saw paintings of him, and like everywhere, like the town is very proud of its literary heritage, and I like that.
Yeah, very
You
much,
know,
very much
if
so.
they're welcoming to writers, then it's my kind of place.
Yes, yes, indeed, yes, indeed. Um, let's see. Where do we want to go now? Do we want to talk Philadelphia experiment? We haven't talked Philadelphia experiment on this show in quite some time. It's been, in fact, I want to say it was Ron Million was the last time I think we talked Philadelphia experiment on this program. That was quite a few years ago.
What did Ron conclude about that experiment?
Let me think. Boy, that was
Was
quite a
he
few.
like, was he pro, like it was a real thing?
Yes,
Or
he
was
was
he
very
okay.
pro. It was a real thing, and he talked a lot of energy fields and talked about how it very much was a real thing and how it could potentially be recreated.
Okay.
Uh,
My understanding of it from, and again, there's room for different interpretations.
mhm.
And the truth is that none of us were there on that night. But with the Philadelphia experiment, just as a recap for anyone that needs it, was when the US Navy allegedly, let's put that word like underlined in bold, tried to make a destroyer, the USS Eldridge, invisible. And so this was the Philadelphia experiment to generate a field which would achieve that, which would be a very handy thing when U-boats were just rampaging through the Atlantic, and sinking civilian and naval ships alike. And supposedly sent this ship through call it a hole in time, call it a transdimensional portal, sent it across the ocean and back, teleported it. There are different hypotheses as to what happened, right, Tim? And they made, firstly, Charles Berlitz wrote the book, which really brought this to public attention. And then they made a movie on it in the 80s, I think it was, with Michael Paré and Nancy Allen, if memory serves, from RoboCop, which was a really cool movie. The thing is, the evidence for it actually happening is not hugely compelling. It's eyewitness testimony, and there's some questions about the credibility of the eyewitness. Also, I don't doubt that people saw this light show going on around the USS Eldridge, but there is a procedure that has been and still is performed on Navy ships called degaussing. I mean, you work in radio, you know all about degaussing. You do it for entirely different reasons, because the reason you do it on a warship or a ship's hull is to make it less attractive to mines. Mm-hmm. You degauss a ship's hull and it's not going to draw in mines as easily as it would be otherwise. So when that process happens, there are kind of sparks and there can be flares, and it can look somewhat spectacular. So the kind of Occam's razor version of the Philadelphia experiment is that they were just degaussing the Eldridge. But it is a very cool story, and it's impossible to say for sure.
Yeah. What Richard's talking about as far as radio goes is back in the old days when we had carts and we had reel-to-reel tapes, you would take and erase a tape by degaussing it. You had a what's called a debulker, or a demagnetizer, and you would just take and you would hit a button and you would rub the tape over that debulker, demagnetizer, and you'd flip it over and rub it again. And in a matter of 30 seconds to a minute, you had a completely erased tape that you could take and reuse and record over. So,
and I'm also willing to bet, Tim, not once after you've done that did you attract a mine.
No, never did.
So,
never had
clearly
one.
very effective.
Never had one stick to the side of my reel-to-reel recorder, Richard.
Well, if that isn't proof of the pudding, Tim, I don't know what is.
Never saw sparks either. Although, you know what I did do, speaking of sparks, which, again, speaking of my sixth sense of humor, I've only told people on the show once this. I got suspended for 2 weeks from my college radio station when I used a debulker or degausser on air doing my morning show. It was the morning that Ted Bundy got executed. And I reenacted it on air by using a stapler on top of a debulker. And I basically did the old Jerry Lewis bit where I said, we go now live to the execution room where Ted Bundy is being executed now. And I put the stapler on top of the degausser and I hit the button. I went, oh, wow, wow, wowie, wow. Yeah, and that was the live audio.
Sure, that went down immensely well, Tim.
Not my advisor, who called me and said, in my office the minute you're off the air. Although I did get a good line in on him. And he sat down with me. His name was Professor Ajit Daniel. He had won awards from the BBC. He had worked for the BBC at one time. And he sat me down and he said, I feel like you have a ton of potential. I feel like you're a fine piece of brass that needs to be polished. I said, let me get this straight. Brass that needs to be polished. He said, yes. I said, like a knob, you want to polish my knob? And he said, get out of my office before I suspend you for a month.
Wow, Tim.
Yeah.
And shockingly, you are not on the BBC to this day.
No, I never have been. No.
Why? I wonder why.
Yeah.
That might be.
It's because I'm incorrigible. So,
It must be, incorrigible, yeah. Well, and gave Ted Bundy a pretty sick burn on his last day.
A big burn, yeah. So
couldn't happen to a nicer fellow, could it?
No. So I always had that sense of humor. But that's how I learned the degauser.
Ah.
See?
So when it comes to stuff like that, like I do love the story of the Philadelphia experiment. I love the movie too. It was great.
Yep.
But you know, it just when there is a mundane explanation that does hold water, you kind of have to start there and not go to the paranormal explanation. And you know, when you look at the documents behind the so-called Philadelphia experiment, they aren't all that credible, in my opinion.
Yeah.
They aren't all that credible. So it's too bad because, like so much in life, I would love it to be true. I would love it to be true, but I find that one to be less than credible now. You know, that's not to say it isn't. But
That's true. That's true. Okay, so as we start to get into the tail end of our show here, you mentioned something to me off air that I kind of want to get. I want to get into a related topic of it, and that's this. You have a chapter in the book about shifting shapes. You have a chapter about wolves, werewolves, skinwalkers,
mhm.
in Skinwalker Ranch. Now, we were talking a little bit about, you'd mentioned something interesting to me about the moon and people changing into werewolves.
Mhm.
Um, through your research, which is interesting because, we have this myth about, people looking up at the moon and changing into werewolves and the tides of the moon and changing into werewolves. Do you want to share with people or do you want to save it for your book? The
No, I think that's fair. So this really, I do talk a little bit about where there is a section on werewolves and dark spirits. Um, and I do find the whole phenomenon fascinating. And so I've been kind of delving into that a little bit more as I work on a current project in the same series, which you'll be able to read exactly this time next year by Visible Ink also. And clinical lycanthropy is a real condition. The idea that it is possible for someone to either transform into a wolf or become wolf-like. It is, it is a real thing. Not the physical transformation side of it, though. The idea that someone can believe that they're a wolf and that they can behave that way. And this is not a new concept. I mean, if you look at the Norse raiders, the Vikings, and I know we call them Vikings. Viking was something you did, not something you were. But the Norsemen that used to raid, there were subsects of Norse warriors that adopted the mantle of the wolf. That they wore wolf pelts, they wore wolf fur, they had like they dressed up. Essentially, they cosplayed as wolves, but then they believed. And there's some debate about did they actually take drugs to help go on this spiritual journey, this spiritual quest, but they believed that they could accept the spirit of a wolf, like a wolf entity, into themselves. And then when they would just tear their way through unsuspecting settlements, these stories came out of these immensely violent, bloodthirsty man wolves that would just descend on the town and just blood everywhere, kill left, right, and center. And the term for them is a word we still use today, berserkers.
Yeah.
So I've always found that fascinating, and perhaps that is the root or part of the root of our werewolf origins, the idea that it is possible to fuse human and wolf. And as you look at kind of werewolf lore, it's interesting because it can be accepted voluntarily, as they did, or it can be something you are cursed with. And I always think about American Werewolf in London, hands down, my favorite werewolf story of all time. The idea that it's a curse there, and there are ways in which you can become cursed. There are ways in which that curse can be broken. So the idea that you are scratched or bitten physically, the curse can be passed on that way, and only ended with with death. The idea of silver bullets. There are all kinds of ways to identify werewolves. Here's one that I found fascinating: the unibrow. The idea that a werewolf's brows meet in the middle. 4% of humanity has a unibrow statistically.
Really?
So it's not, yeah, I actually checked.
Huh.
I actually went to the medical studies. So 4% of humanity technically could be masquerading werewolves, which I love. But I also went to the medical literature, and the truth is that I work as a 911 paramedic. I always kick myself when I pick up a night shift and I go outside and it's a full moon. And I'm like, oh, why? It's gonna suck. Anybody that works in medicine, that works law enforcement, emergency response, will tell you the full moon is busier and the calls we get are weirder, right?
Yeah.
And so it's been studied though, and it turns out it's not busier. We all believe it to our core, but the science, the data shows us that you are no more likely to end up in an emergency department on a full moon than a new moon or a waxing gibbous or whatever it is. I know it's crazy, but the data is there. It's such a prevailing belief, though. And we know the moon has gravitational effects on the tides and all kinds of other things. So I'm fascinated as to how much of this is purely psychological.
Yeah.
One case that interested me, and it did not get written about in Dark Spirits, but I will come back to it in a later book, is the werewolf that the Warrens investigated in the UK in the late 1970s, Ed and Lorraine Warren. Now, what was kind of fascinating about this guy was that he acted like a werewolf and he got into a knockdown drag out with an entire police station full of British bobbies. Like they had to arm and leg this guy, a whole platoon of men, basically to get him into a cell overnight. And he reached a point where he was phoning them and saying, hey, it's happening again. I need you to send a van over. And they would send a van of cops over to bring this guy to a cell for the night, you know? The Warrens told him that he was possessed by the spirit of a wolf entity. Which, whether you believe it or not, I know, you know, your own individual mileage will vary, right? Certainly the Warrens, without getting too much into it, are polarizing figures. They have their detractors and they have their supporters. Few people do not have an opinion. One thing you can't argue, though, is boy, did they find a lot of demons if you believe them, you know? They never, it seems like they rarely did a case where they didn't find a demon. So they arranged for this guy to fly out to the US and he was exorcised. And they had like 6 guards with stun guns supervising this exorcism. Now, if you believe Lorraine Warren, she swears that his neck muscles began to bunch up and his ears began to point. There are a number of photographs of this exorcism, none of which show him having pointed ears, I noticed. But once the exorcism was over, and it was quite an aggressive exorcism, you know, the guy would, his hands would turn into claws, he would froth at the mouth, he would gnash, he would act like a wolf. Once it was over, apparently he had no further problems. So was this a case of clinical lycanthropy? Was it in other words, a case of mental illness, or was he genuinely possessed by some kind of wolf spirit, which would overtake him and an exorcism fixed? I don't know. But I will say this, Tim, one of the weirder things is I've looked at some contemporary werewolf claims, and a lot of them occur in the daytime.
Really?
Yeah, or not at the full moon. So I do think the full moon component to this may purely be psychological. But there was one I looked at in the UK in a place called Cannock Chase, supposedly one of the most haunted parts of the entire British Isles, where a couple actually ran into this werewolf in the trees outside a golf course in the middle at lunchtime. You know, they both say they saw it. They swear they saw it. Whatever it was, snatched their daughter. So, you know, I find this whole thing fascinating. I don't know if it's a psychological phenomenon or not. And it kind of leads us into that realm, doesn't it, of skinwalkers and shapeshifters and the idea that, you know, with skinwalkers, you have an individual that can, through dark arts, dark magic, willingly make a pact with the powers of darkness in exchange for the ability to change shape and transform. It might sound fantastical, but certainly to indigenous individuals, it's part of their culture, and they give a great deal of credit to this idea of skinwalkers.
And it's I have to suspend a little bit of my disbelief there too when I hear the stories. But then, you know, I've seen like some of the Small Town Monsters documentaries, and you see the genuine emotion there.
Yeah, fear primarily.
Fear, right? And then I don't know if you've seen, there's one particular documentary that Seth Breedlove produced
Mhm.
where you actually hear the scratching up on top of the roof of one of the gentlemen who's um, speaking to Seth, and you just say to yourself, I can't actually believe that you could put on a show when it comes to this. And I know Seth's not faking anything. I know this.
Mhm. Yeah,
Uh,
I've filmed with Seth, and
yeah,
I found him to be very open minded and very credible,
yeah.
professional.
So it's just, so how do I don't want to say how does this happen, because in the world you would like to think that there's good magic and bad magic in the world, if magic exists, and how does it exist, right? And how do you, not necessarily how you tap into it, but I don't want any of that juju, um but if so, how is it that it exists in certain areas, and how did that type of bad magic happen to good people? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but bad things happen to good people all the time, right? I mean, that's just life. So
Yeah, but I mean, just it seems so random, right? It's not like this family did something to someone and karma bounced back on them.
mhm.
It's like this supernatural force that just decided you're in the way.
Maybe, or maybe it is literally a case of just bad things happening to good people. I mean, I don't want to sound crass, but when you have an active shooting, bad things happen to good people. They weren't usually selected. They happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time when something terrible occurred.
Yeah.
So I try not to impute too much meaning into things like that if I can. Otherwise, it will definitely keep you up at night. But sometimes that's the way the universe works. But I do think that if you believe in magic, um, it would have to be a double-edged sword, as is any of the forces at work in our world. So whether you want to look at technology, science, technology, they can both be used for great good and they can both be used for great evil. It depends on the hand which wields them and the way in which they're employed.
Yeah, I don't know why I have. I mean, the whole Skinwalker Ranch phenomena, that apex, if you will, that whole area when it comes to not just UFO, but um, you've got ghost phenomena there.
Yeah, the Wintel Basin. Yeah,
Yeah, that whole area there. You just wonder why that crux of land, and why that activity, and why those indigenous people.
and I kind of wonder if it's the perfect storm. Like some places are kind of the perfect storm for this stuff to go down. Like Stonehenge or Glastonbury in the UK are known as magical places. The idea that it just seems as though there is something about the ground and the history and the people that all comes together to allow something magical to happen. Magical doesn't always have to mean good.
Yeah.
So maybe in the Wintel Basin, you have this mix of belief and culture and tradition and geology, you know. Um, and plus, I think there's a lot to be said for the fact that those stories are told over and over. And when you inject enough belief, concentrated, focused thought into them, that maybe acts as a catalyst, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, I think you're right about that. There's If you have enough people who are injecting that much fear and belief into it, I think the fear, the raw emotion, adds a little bit of gasoline to the fire too. And it just is, it's that constant emotion that's thrown in there. It really does fuel that phenomena to continue to exist, because I really do believe they feed on it.
I believe that belief is directed. I mean, it's directed thought, it's directed energy. So it certainly makes sense to think so, doesn't it?
Mhm.
The idea that something might tap into that. I mean, prayer is the positive side of that coin. I think curses are the negative side.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. Speaking of fear and prayer and a phenomena that seems like it may or may not respond to it. I want to, I guess, wrap up today by talking about the alien phenomena and UFOs, because you hear sometimes that depending on, especially with abductees, uh, they can or can't, depending on their situation, they can either, if they're willing or unwilling, can say, I don't want anything to do with this. And if they have intent, they can drive them off. Or if they're somewhat willing or unwilling, they either go along for the ride, even if they're unwilling and bad things happen to them. Or if they're unwilling and say stop, or I call out the name of Jesus or whatever, they can push them away.
One thing I noticed when I was researching UFOs, Tim, is that there are two descriptors of people that have these experiences. There are the abductees and there are the contactees. Mm-hmm. And even the language, I think, is important, because the notion that, an abductee is taken, right? If you're abducted, by definition, it's against your will. By definition, it's not a pleasant experience, right? It's not something you would seek out or want. Contactees are the ones that talk about, the more pleasant side of things, that they will often say that the experience opened their eyes. It was life-changing for the better. They gained a new perspective on our global problems and our place in the grander scheme of things as a species and things like that. So the contactees seem to be the ones that would either actively seek out, choose, or at the very least cooperate with these experiences. Abductees are very much not. And the one of the abductees, I should say, that I interviewed, who has now sadly passed on, he frankly said it ruined his life. It ruined his life. And he was taken forcibly, he said, and repeatedly, and talked of medical experiments, none of which were consensual, and caused him significant emotional and nervous problems. And he cautioned me about even writing about it. He said, you be careful if you shine a light on this. Show an interest in them and they might show an interest in you. So it, again, seems to be a phenomenon which has a light side and a dark side, to borrow a phrase. I probably owe George Lucas a buck for saying it, but I'm sorry, Disney now.
Disney,
but,
yes.
I do think that when you look at the UFO UAP phenomenon, Tim, or extraterrestrial, or whatever you want to call it, it has this dual nature, positive and negative.
I have an interesting question for you, because we both know the man. Travis Walton, do you believe that it's had a positive or negative effect on him?
Yes.
That's an interesting answer.
I mean, I would never presume to speak for Travis. I've been to several events with him. I had a little bit of culture shock, because my first experience or awareness of Travis was as a young man in the UK, and I went to see Fire in the Sky, the movie, which it's a horror movie, right? I mean, it's not a movie you watch for some light entertainment. His experience is portrayed as being brutal and savage, and not something anyone would want. And he's portrayed as this rough and ready kind of logger. And as you know, when you meet Travis, he's a very well-spoken, articulate, thoughtful, soft-spoken man, and just a delight to speak with, very smartly dressed, and I mean, who knows for sure? But as I spoke with him, I believe that he believes. I don't know where he was for that missing period of time. I would be surprised if he went through all that deliberately, because he isn't exactly living high on the hog on it, is he?
No.
This is not a guy that's living in a mansion on the hill and making it rain $100 bills. So has he made some money on his story and gained some fame? Yeah, he has. Does it outweigh the negative side of things and the fact that he became a laughingstock in the media and all kinds of, accusations were made against him? I would be surprised if he thought it was a positive experience. But you'd have to ask Travis. I just don't know.
But if I can throw my own conjecture in it, I guess, sitting and just observing him, you're right. He hasn't made a ton of money off of it. He has gotten some ridicule off of it. And there have been a ton of negatives, including the actual experience itself.
Yeah.
But then if you sit and watch him at a convention, or you watch him go to dinner with fellow speakers,
Mm-hmm.
and you watch him joke around with people,
Mm-hmm.
and you watch him make friends. You think to yourself, maybe he's living a richer life than he would have had aliens left him alone.
Maybe, yeah, it's impossible to say. And I think the only person could answer that would be Travis.
Sure.
You know, maybe he's exceptionally good at turning a lemon into lemonade.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and maybe some of it comes down to how he has taken this experience and what he's made of it. And I don't mean that as a criticism. In fact, if anything, quite the opposite. Let's pause it for a minute, because I know I've heard both sides of the story, and I don't know if Travis's experience was genuine or not. I can't say. I wasn't there.
Okay.
But let's posit that it was genuine for a minute. You know, you have several ways that you could respond to that. And I think making something positive of it is the best of those choices. And Travis seems to have done that by and large from what I've seen of him.
Right, right. And again, I'm not criticizing at all. I think if anybody, I think that's taken a huge negative, made it a positive, I think it's Travis Walton. I applaud him for it. So I was just interested what you thought of that. And with that, I think we'll wrap up for tonight. Which I think again, there's so many things I could sit and talk to you for hours about this, Richard. This book is amazing. This is the book right here, Dark Spirits, Monsters, Demons, and Devils. It's put out by visibleinkpress, and it's available right now. We have a link in the description of this program. Richard, I want to thank you so much for being on the program tonight.
Thank you, Tim. It's always a pleasure to come back on the show. I think I've been interviewed by you now for my entire writing career. You've been with me since my very first book in 2013.
Wow. Well, yeah. I would hope we'll continue to do this. You have new projects that are on the way, and I'm looking forward to each and every new project. I look forward to each and every new book that you come out with, because it's so good. You have such good stuff out there. I know we didn't get around to, the Fox Hollow TV project is out there. Do you have any words about any of the stuff that came out with Fox Hollow?
Yeah, so the Fox Hollow Farm TV series is on Hulu or Disney in the rest of the world. It's called the Fox Hollow Murders, Playground of a Serial Killer. And one of the sources was my book, The Horrors of Fox Hollow Farm, which they purchased the rights to. I had no involvement with making the show, but I am very pleased with what they did. And I will say this, that I'd written about the haunting. The TV series addresses that somewhat, but it's primarily about the murders. And the key thing is the quest to identify the victims of the serial killer, Herb Baumeister. And I want to say that, my hat goes off to everyone involved with that TV show, because hundreds of people have come forward since the show aired with offering DNA samples in the hopes of identifying some of those unidentified men whose remains were found at Fox Hollow Farm. So, it's very easy to get down on TV, especially reality TV, but the show is having a really positive impact on a case that frankly should never have been closed as early as it was, and really deserved far greater investigation than it received.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, again, folks, here it is. Dark Spirits, Monsters, Demons, and Devils. I encourage you to get it. We have a link in the description of this program. Richard, I want to thank you so much for being on the program today.
Thank you, my friend. It is always a pleasure. And let's do this again later in the year.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Folks, a couple of notes for you before we leave you today. The executive producer of today's program is Troy Palmer. Troy, thank you for everything you do for the program. We appreciate it. The Darkness Radio Apple app is available right now. If you don't have it, go to your Apple store. Download the Darkness Radio Apple app. We want you to do that. If you need it update it, please, because it's been updated for iOS 18. We want you to do that as well. And the darknessradioshow.com store. Go to it as well if you want to support the show. Get some cool swag from the darknessradioshow.com store. So that'll do it for this weekend. A reminder, as you go out this weekend, go help somebody in need, somebody who may be disabled, somebody who needs your help in the community. Go help somebody in your community this weekend. Be a light in someone's darkness this weekend. A message from your buddies here at Darkness Radio. For Jessica Freeberg, for Mally Fox, for Beer City Bruiser, I'm Tim Dennis. Thank you so much for watching and listening to us here on the best in paranormal podcasting. You've been tuned into Darkness Radio.
For more audio and video archives of the show, intriguing content, and cool swag, check out darknessradioshow.com. The executive producer of Darkness Radio is Troy Palmer. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to like and subscribe. Have a great weekend and remember to go out and be a light in someone's darkness.